Hi, I'm Derek Desjardins, and this is the Lectory Perilous. This is going to be my third installment in my enrichment and acceleration series, in which I bring up a topic that I think your child or you should study fairly deeply, but in all likelihood, you are not going to be exposed to it very much in public school. And today we're going to be talking about Vasco da Gama. Now, Vasco da Gama was an explorer from the age of exploration, and students will be exposed to the age of exploration at some point in their academic careers. However, the likelihood that da Gama is going to be taken out and examined, and how consequential he was towards later European imperialism and globalism, that's probably not going to happen. So it's worth it to take da Gama on his own and really look about what made him important. And I have a couple of books I'm going to recommend. A couple of books on the age of exploration in general, and a couple of books on da Gama in particular. So we're going to have, after this video, 3 points. We talked about the Ottoman Empire. We talked about Jainism, specifically Mahavira, and we're going to be talking about the age of exploration and da Gama in this video. And what's neat about having 3 points is now you can start making some meaningful connections happen, which we're going to be doing later on in our timelining activity, but also in this initial conversation. I'm going to point out some interesting concordances and interactions with things that we've talked about already. Now, the age of exploration, we are talking about, like with any historical age, there's not really a set beginning date and a set end date. Some people mark the age of exploration with Columbus's first voyage. I like to go back a little bit. I like to go to Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal. Prince Henry the Navigator was the son of John I, the King of Portugal, and he took it upon himself to really push the idea of exploring the South Atlantic, trying to find a pathway, a means of getting around the southern tip of Africa, which far more difficult than it seems for a variety of reasons, not just because of the distances involved, but also because of prevailing currents and winds. It's quite an accomplishment to take a wooden tub and get around the Cape of Good Hope. So let's talk about Prince Henry the Navigator around 1450s. If you're paying attention, the 1450s will harken back to an important date from a previous video. And then to the very early 1600s. Remember, Jamestown was founded around 1607. So it's fair to say that 150 year time period is really a good encapsulation for the age of exploration / age of discovery. Now, Vasco da Gama specifically was the first European to reach India by sea, and he undertook what at that time was the longest ocean voyage ever, 30,000 miles in total. That's more than a circumnavigation of the globe, and the reason why it took so long was because to get around Africa, he had to take some very creative routes. As I mentioned earlier, da Gama making it to India really ushered in this age of globalization and European imperialism. And the reason this voyage was conducted in the first place, initiated, and remember, these were highly lethal and dangerous voyages, expensive. This was not something to be done on a lark. The driving factor was largely luxury goods from what was called the Indies. Now, the Indies do include India, but also many islands and island chains to the east of India, but most specifically spices. And in the history of the world, food, drives a lot of things. And Europeans love their spices for a variety of reasons, but one of those being that often their food was kind of unpalatable without spices. Now, with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, one of the major spice routes got choked off. And spices were insanely expensive, worth more than their weight in gold. So the idea of Europeans, specifically in this case Portugal, finding a route around Africa, bypassing Constantinople and the Middle East and the Mediterranean routes, and going straight to India, this was a very lofty goal, and da Gama did it. Now, when you read about da Gama, you have to be prepared to engage in some mature content. Because like many of these Portuguese explorers, he was a complex person and often very heavy-handed. There are stories of torture and atrocities. So you can do a glossed over version for younger children, but if you're going to be engaging with the materials I'm recommending, perhaps more appropriate for more mature children. Another nice thing about studying da Gama and any of these explorers is it's going to allow you to hone in on map skills. I always believe, and you probably know this if you've watched any of my other videos, things should be marked in time with timelines, but they should also be marked in space with maps. So, finger tracing on a globe, getting a blank map or a black line master of a map and actually tracing out the routes and labeling them. This is really good for developing geographical skills, spatial skills, and really just for recall and retention. So, 2 books I have that talk about the age of exploration in general that I really like. The first one is by Jean Fritz. She's written a lot of very good informative books. This one is Around the World in 100 Years. Now this one again it's more general book on exploration. Some very cool illustrations. And each chapter, here's Columbus, shows all the routes of travel. Fritz doesn't really pull any punches. You're gonna see the good, the bad, and the ugly when you read Fritz. So, Around the World in 100 Years, I do recommend. The other one that I recommend is from National Geographic. So not surprisingly, it's a very good resource. And this one is called The World Made New. And it's, timelines on different pages, excellent illustrations. So for a more general journey through the age of exploration, this is a great one. Now, specifically about da Gama, not a lot. There's not a lot for kids. And for kids, I'm thinking maybe mature 5th graders, possibly 4th graders. Middle schoolers definitely can handle this material. I have 2 books. This one is called Vasco da Gama, Quest for the Spice Islands by Catherine Bailey. Okay. And right there, the Quest for the Spice Islands in the title. And very attractive book. It's text dense, but not beyond a motivated middle schooler or upper elementary student. But you'll see here later on, if I recall correctly, there it is. You can see some of the really interesting geographical landmarks that da Gama encountered in his various voyages. This one, A Long and Uncertain Journey, 27,000-Mile Voyage of Vasco da Gama, and this one is by Joan Elizabeth Goodman. This one really gets into details. Text heavy, but not just text. There's some really attractive illustrations. But you'll see that you do encounter some of the atrocities that were committed by da Gama and his crew during his voyages. So this is always a tricky little topic, but one that needs to be addressed because history doesn't make sense without the Age of Exploration. So, Vasco da Gama, he's worth a specific look. I would probably put him in league with Columbus insofar as importance goes. Columbus went to the west, da Gama went to the east, but they both were really after the same thing. They were after a spice route for Europe. Next, we're going to do a little timelining activity, and here's where we get to tie some interesting things together. And learning really is about increasing that complexity. It's about taking individual ideas and facts that seem to hang alone, and let's see how we can button them together. All right, so go ahead and gather your timelining materials, a pencil, a piece of paper, and a ruler, and I'll see you in a second. Hey, welcome back. Okay, so I have a completed timeline. I put fewer dates on my timeline, just to keep it a little more open. As you start getting more information on these timelines, sometimes it will behoove you to move the dates to different places or not necessarily label each interval. But again, do what suits you. All right, so let's put our Age of Exploration down. So earlier I mentioned that the mid-1400s is a good place to start, but Columbus's first voyage is also not a bad place to start. Now Columbus was essentially 1492. Prince Henry the Navigator just a little bit before that, 1450s. So we could say that might be about the 1450s. And then finishing in the very early 1600s. So we're talking right about here. So our Age of Exploration in the grand scheme of things seems to take up a small amount of space. However, of course, incredibly important for global future developments. So this is our Age of Exploration. Now, what's really, really interesting to my mind is we've got the fall of Constantinople right around here at the beginning of the Age of Exploration, which is not a coincidence. In fact, much of the exploration done during the Age of Discovery was in direct response to the fact that the Ottomans were now choking off many of the supply lines for luxury goods from the Indies and from the East. Don't forget we also had, that's your 500 BC, so around 600 we had Mahavira from Jainism. So these are our three topics that we've addressed so far. Now, I don't know if this is going to be interesting to you, but it's interesting to me. I have an idea of what topics I'm going to eventually want to cover, but I am picking them almost somewhat at random to begin. And this is so I can practice what I preach, and this is forcing connections. So if I'm going to think about the Age of Exploration, if I'm going to think about the Ottoman Empire, and I'm going to think about Jainism, well, is there something that they all have in common? And I would say yes. I would say that they all have in common India. Okay. So Vasco da Gama eventually made his way to Calicut, India. and established a foothold for what would be the Portuguese Empire there. The Ottomans, by conquering Constantinople and making it part of their empires, Istanbul, essentially controlled a large part of the trade coming from India and the rest of the Indies. And of course, Mahavira and Jainism, that is an Indian religion. So is that an important connection? Is this a relevant or necessary connection? I don't really know. However, the fact is when the mind starts putting disparate ideas together, learning happens. And learning happens in interesting ways. And one of those is what I like to think of as forced connection. How are these ideas related to each other, and are these connections relevant? Well, I would certainly say that the fall of Constantinople and the Age of Exploration are definitely related to one another. Is the fact that Jainism is from India related to this? Well, possibly somewhere down the chain of events. However, it is just getting me thinking, and I'm hoping that it will serve the same for your child. So, Age of Exploration, Vasco da Gama, worth a look. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.